Well, hello and welcome to the 20... No, it's not the 23rd episode. Hello? That's stupid. Well, hello and welcome to the 43rd episode of the Adoption and Fostering Podcast.
Hello, stupid.
Hello. Where?
23rd. You've cut them in half. Seriously.
Where did those 20 episodes go? How are you, Scott?
I'm all right, I think.
Oh, that was convincing.
I'm in a little bit of a bubble. It's been a busy old 2 weeks. So, yeah. I think this is the first night I've actually sat down in about 2 weeks.
Why? Where was you before now?
Well, the weekend we had our Volunteers Day.
Oh, how did that go?
Really well. Really, really well. It was amazing, actually. Yeah. I mean, I love those kinds of events anyway. It's just a nice opportunity to...
show off?
No, show off. What's to show off?
It's
no,
the Scott show.
Oh my! It wasn't actually. I chaired it. Yes, I did. I did chair it, but I didn't have anything intelligent to say apart from thank you. But what was really lovely, there was a couple of bits that were really lovely. The training that we provided was fantastic. So we did some facilitation training. We did some FASD training.
Good.
And then what really was amazing was presenting some volunteers who've been volunteering for us since. Well, actually, before records began at Adoption UK in terms of volunteers.
Really?
Yeah, so it's at least 30 years I've been volunteering for the organisation. Yeah, so I presented them with a bouquet and a bottle of bubbles to say thank you.
Is that all for 30 years service? That's
I know.
pathetic.
Well, it's a charity, Alf.
All right. Oh, yeah. Okay.
But they were.
You could have given them a signed photograph of yourself.
Of you.
Of me, yeah, I'd have done that. Yeah.
Actually, there's a little thing we could think about.
A picture of you and me, like smashy and nicey.
with your little new badge. Anyway, so it was really good. But we did a networking evening the night before, obviously,
of course,
for people who stayed over, and I think that's what takes its toll actually, because you're never, yes, you're enjoying a meal, but actually you're just constantly, thinking work. So, and then I had my cousin's 50th on the Saturday night, so the whole family went to that, and then Monday and Tuesday I was in Newcastle.
Newcastle, man, you just reel from celebrations to award ceremonies to your life is just so showbiz. It's a Saint-Tropez lifestyle.
I just don't know where I am half the time, to be honest with you. But Newcastle was lovely. The weather was great. It was a bit cooler than it is down here, and I didn't take a jacket. We went out on the Tyne on a boat for a barbecue. I mean,
a barbecue on a boat? What will they think of next?
I know, yeah. So, and apparently, according to that gathering of people, so it was the CVA, so Annie Crombie, who we've interviewed before,
friend of the show,
who's stepping down as CEO, as she announced on Monday, which I'm allowed to say.
Shut the front door.
Yeah, very sad news actually. She's made a massive. I mean, well, you and I both know she's done a lot for
she
us as adoptive parents and adoptive voice and getting us heard. And so she's stepping down in the autumn. But interestingly,
sorry, stop. What is the CVA? Because I'm aware that there are people who probably we're immersed in this world. What is the CVA?
Yes, yes, that's probably right. Actually, there isn't it?
No, it's not probably right. It is right.
Well, it is right. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, smarty bum.
No, I just feel like I need to push back a bit because you are just so wrong on so many things.
Do you know what it is? It's just I'm buzzing on adrenaline at the minute, so I'm just blah, 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 blah.
Okay.
So the CVA is a consortium of voluntary adoption agencies.
Right. Good.
Which is a membership organisation that supports voluntary adoption agencies, but they also do some work, some commission work on the DFE on statistics of adoptions. So all the data we get out of the DFE comes from the CVA. They collate it, and they also do the administration for the ASGLB, so the Adoption Special Guardianship Leadership Board. Yeah.
You are so in the know, aren't you, about everything?
No, I'm not. That's how I work with them. So, and it was their annual conference, so their members could go along. So yeah, so it was interesting. But what was interesting was, oh hi Scott, hi. Yeah, is Al coming?
What?
No, we're not. We're not a double act all the time, you know. Oh, but he lives up here. You should have invited him. No, I shouldn't have done. And
I'd have loved that. I mean, I would have been sick as a dog on a boat. A barbecue on a boat is like.
Well, that's just double trouble for you.
I have literally felt seasick watching the sea from the shore. I mean, Paula.
I remember when you went on holiday. Paula went out on the boat. I said, "Does Al not go?" And she went, "No, you can't do boats at all."
I can't even look at boats without getting seasick. I'm pathetic. So the kids mock me. My children mock me.
I'm not surprised. I'm going to mock you as well now.
Oh, well, good.
But yeah, so... but what was interesting was they all said, "Oh yeah, we listened to the podcast," and
really?
I was like, "Oh, okay." So yeah, so that's an interesting audience.
Oh.
So hi to everybody who's a member of the CVAA.
You're all lovely people.
Yeah, they are lovely people.
I'm available for work. And you know why, Scott, don't you? Why I'm available for work? Because you've ruined my career.
I know.
By
now
association.
You've said that.
Yeah.
Now you've said that.
What?
You're going to have to expand.
No, I can't expand.
But you can't say it then.
Okay, I didn't say it.
So you told everybody who's listening that I've ruined your career.
I didn't say that.
You did. That was your exact words.
No, I didn't.
Pause, rewind, and play.
I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, how has your week been, Scott?
I've just told you about my week. You got memory loss.
I'm waiting for you to ask me because I've got.
I'm just about to. When you on my series, do you know what? You're like Paxman. You are talking about that. I've been offered a new job. Do you want to hear about it? Do you want to hear about this offer?
Yeah. But
yeah.
Why
your
wasn't
man
I informed?
Question time stood down.
Yeah.
Well,
not
apparently.
Oh, John Humphreys. Yeah.
We were. No, John Humphreys. David Dimbleby.
Same difference.
Well, apparently you and I were top of the list because when they searched Paxman on Google, apparently we both come up because you mentioned Paxman all the time. So they've approached me because they said that they didn't really think your accent was up to it.
And they wanted someone more posh like you. This is the world of the strange because Paxman doesn't even show. I don't understand.
Anyway,
that's bizarre.
So, how's your week, Al?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Well, I have. Right. Fortunately, Paula and the Massive don't listen to the podcast, so I can speak freely. But my house has started to look like an explosion in a mother care factory.
Oh no!
Because, as you know, that the eldest daughter has returned in a state of pregnancy. Is that the correct term?
I don't know what the correct term is.
Well,
up to death. I don't know.
Up the
bun in the oven.
Bun in the oven. There is a bun in the oven, and quite frankly, it looks like several loaves in the oven. She's enormous. She looks like a satsuma on a cocktail stick.
Having seen both your daughters pregnant, honestly, that is just not a very nice description. Thank God they don't listen, is all I can say.
So they will kill me. But what I've realised is, and I've just started to have this suspicion, that there's some other, because I'm a house full of women. You know, there's actually, when I think about it, there's nothing but women in the house. There's six women and me. I have a feeling that some of the women in the house are having sympathetic pregnancies.
Oh no, really?
There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on.
Is this just the ones that are post kind of puberty, or is it all of them?
Just all of them. Even the dogs are coming out. It's just, we've gone into Olympic level nesting in the house. That's why there's this irresistible urge in all of them to empty drawers and then tidy them, put them all back, and they're just that I am so out of my depth here. As we know by my sweeping story. You remember the sweeping story?
Yeah. Remember that from the last pregnancy, Grandad. Yeah.
Well, she said to me, the baby's engaged. And I was thinking, what?
Already?
I thought, already? I was thinking, what? Is this like a new thing that the kids are into? Or is this some sort of like social media thing?
And arranged marriage or something?
Yeah. And I was like, what? And I just looked like an idiot. And she went, it's engaged. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And she went, it's turned round inside. I have no idea. So it's really strange. And what I am conscious, though, talking about this is like an adoption and fostering podcast,
Yes,
and we're talking
I
about
know.
pregnancy.
Yes, but this is relevant, isn't it? Because neither of us have a clue about any of these terms. Although I do know what engaged means because I do listen to ladies. Yeah.
All right.
And I did know what a sweep was as well. Not something the chimney.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just think that isn't that really odd that this world has passed us by. There's probably lots of people listening thinking, two men talking about pregnancy on an adoption podcast like that. We're so out of our depth, aren't we? Well, I am.
And also, is this a general man thing as well? As in, like men who have supported their partners to have babies. Do they start out like this, or do they actually end up understanding? Who knows? You have to ask, what's his name? Thingy's fiance.
Oh yes, my daughter got engaged to a functioning adult human.
I'm not mentioning his name, obviously. You have to think of a name for him, a pseudonym for him.
Dave.
Ralph.
Ralph. Dave and Ralph. No, it's Dave. So my life is moving at a pace, and so there's a great deal of nesting, and there's a great deal of there's a frisson of hormones. That's putting it nicely. It is like a riot in a hormone factory. There's all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So I am circling the wagons, and there's going to be a baby shower, but I'm leaving the joint. I'm getting out of here.
Yeah,
I'm so out of my depth. Anywho, is there anything else? I was trying to think what else. Moving on to a more serious thing. Have you been watching the news, Scott? This American stuff?
Sadly, yes, I have.
Oh.
And I say sadly because it's just,
I don't even want to talk about it.
I'm struggling to know what to say about it because I just think that idiot needs to be removed from society.
Well, there goes our American listeners. Bye-bye.
Yeah, sorry about that, American listeners. Interestingly, and this is interesting, and no, she won't listen to this. But interestingly, one of my childhood friends actually lives in America.
Mm-hmm.
And she's actually a Trump supporter. And I kind of ignore stuff that she does now and again. But interestingly, tonight I noticed that she'd commented on something about this story that's coming out about these children. And she actually put on, and it does make me think about how people can think this is normal behaviour, because she actually put, when are we going to stop? When are you guys going to stop? But she didn't actually say these words, but she said basically slagging off Trump. It's been 2 years now. You need to let it go. Blah 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 blah. And I just looked at the thread under it, and there was not one person in support of her. They were all saying "shut up" and all that. And there was much nastier things said as well. But I just don't get it. And it's so upsetting seeing this stuff and all this, social media stuff, and that newsreader in America who was actually in tears on air reading the story. What is going on in America that's supposed to be this advanced country, and they're doing this? Seriously.
It beggars belief. And I've never been in a situation like that, but as individuals, we've seen that. And as a foster carer, it's you think this is just there's no grey area in this.
No.
There's no. Yeah. Will they be okay? Will they not? It is just, this is traumatic, and this stuff hangs over children, and the legalities of all of that stuff is the murky stuff, but actually children are the victims.
Yeah.
It's unconscionable, and I've had to turn off the telly and look away, and I have a pretty robust constitution, but I just think this is just bonkers, and it feels like we're dehumanizing these children. Yeah. It's just awful business. Well,
and then he's coming to visit us in a few weeks, and you just think, what sort of?
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose we don't want to get. I don't care. Let's get political.
Okay.
No, let's not get political.
No, let's not, because it can only end one way.
Which is...
Well, we'll actually probably agree on enemies.
Well, yeah. Yeah, but what I find bizarre is that I meet people who agree with him, and that's
Yes, I find that very bizarre.
But then that makes me reflect on, am I in my own little echo chamber, and I go, oh, stuff it, who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares? This is wrong is wrong.
Yeah, it is wrong.
Anywho, we could have got our blood up about that one, couldn't we?
Oh, it's boiling a little bit. It's bubbling away.
Is it? It's that time of year. Now, we had an interview with someone that I've met a few times. I don't know, have you met Mark before?
I have many times. Yes.
Many times. You are so much more connected than I am.
No, it's just I go to work and you don't. So.
Yes, that's a very fair point. Honestly, yeah. There's big question marks over what I actually do. But Mark is one of these people that I find quite intriguing, because when you look for, he's not in the landscape, but when you start to look for him, you see him. He's quite well connected, isn't he? And he's not like he's not a showboat kind of guy. He seems quite wise. And we spoke to him last week, didn't we? Which was a fantastic interview.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but there's some bits of it that I found really interesting. And I thought there was 3 sort of sections, wasn't there? There was his own story, there was fostering, and there was adoption. Each one of them could have been a full hour on its own.
I was reflecting on it afterwards, and I was just thinking that was such interesting. You're right. It was split quite well, and interestingly, he was the one that split it, because he moved us on.
He's such a professional.
I'll tell you, he's good.
He'll not be on again.
Well, actually, it might help us. What was interesting was reflecting on the whole thing, because actually it was a really, really good chat that we had with him. But it also got me to thinking of, because obviously I've been working in the sector for 4 years, but it's only very recently, and I'm talking about last year and a half, that I became aware of him. Well, you'll find out, but in the interview that's explained, and I was like, that's why I've not known you for this 4 years kind of thing. So but yeah, his whole kind of background, his personal story, the whole jing bang, I was just fascinated. I really was just fascinated by that.
I feel like we would be friends if we met him in real life.
Wow.
But do you know what? This is really stupid, and reflects on how dim I am. Is that I was thinking today, this whole regionalisation agenda, I just dawned on me, I thought, do you know what? When this happens, I don't know who to call. I thought, I don't know what's happening in my region. I don't know where my local authority's PAS is going to end up geographically. I don't know what number to ring. I don't know anything.
No, and that's the biggest complaint as well. And despite, things like Adoptive Voice, and some of them they've used their own engagement tools, there's a couple of things that are popping up, and that is that access point. So where is the front door?
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And the last thing is, where do I get my adoption support? And the unfortunate thing is that these RAAs have been so focused on getting set up that they haven't thought about adoption support. They've been more interested in kind of, systems, moving people around, 2P, who hosts who, da-da-da-da-da.
And that was Twitter last night, wasn't it? There was someone saying that exact thing. Just, I've rang them up and they've said, we're not doing it at the moment.
Yeah.
Go, what the hell?
I feel very lucky, actually, because we don't live, for little J-Bomb, we don't live in a local authority yet that supports us. I say we're lucky. I don't know, bear with me on this, but actually we just rang a number and they picked it up, and within a couple of days we had an adoption support fund assessment of need because they are a region now, and they're live, and it's all been done within a couple of days. And I was like, oh my, because that's not everybody's experience.
I suppose you spend your day listening to stories, helping people with stories that are not streamlined.
Exactly.
So there are good stories out there. Of course there are.
Yeah,
Our stories is pretty good. But I mean, I just thought, crikey, because we talked about the contact, and the contact...
that's caused...
oh, blimey. Yeah.
Conversations.
Yeah. Cough, cough. Well, no, we talked about the contact one, and I think that's been really well received, because it's something that's so prescient and so on people's minds. But actually thinking about this one, it may not be as well known, and the issue is not as well embedded in people's minds, but regionalisation is coming, and we need to get ourselves tooled up as adopters, don't we?
Yeah. You're so right. And it was interesting because I was at a regional adoption leadership board meeting. And
Get you.
I know. I'm just name dropping all night tonight.
You are dropping,
But I'm trying to share what I'm, living during the day to inform people on this, because actually, why would I not? And they asked what adopters thought of regionalisation. And I said, until a regional adoption agency is set up, actually, nobody really cares about regionalisation. All they want to know is that if they're receiving, any form of kind of financial contribution that is secure, that they can still ring up and say, I need help. Or sorry, they can start ringing up and say, I need help, because we know that, the majority of adopters don't feel that they get that. I said, and beyond that, at this stage, nobody really cares. And I thought about it afterward. I've said it, and I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, because it makes it sound like nobody cares about regional adoption agencies. It's not that. It's just that it's just not well known about at this stage. And also, there's so many horror stories about it. People are scared of it, actually.
Well, I think the professionals must be scared. There must be anxiety. But I was, as you were saying that, I was thinking, well, if you're coming to adoption, you don't know any different unless you're a second-time adopter. So you ring the number and you get what you get. Mm-hmm. It's us at the tail end and the post-adoption support. But I got a real shock at myself, because I thought, well, what's going to happen to my friendly adoption social worker? We're building up a good relationship with, and she's great, like her.
Yeah.
But is she going to keep a job? Is she going to?
Exactly.
So I don't know. It's all a bit peculiar, isn't it?
I think generally, as a rule, the teams have kind of been merged together. So if you've got three local authorities, and you've got, as an example, because some of them are a bit smaller, aren't they? So some of them might only have one adoption support worker, and the other might have four.
Yeah.
The blending those teams together, or if someone wants to move into assessments, and they feel that that's where they've got great experience in, and they're doing that. But of course, every adoption agency is working differently, because some of them are actually, giving them a reduced caseload, which is actually assessments and support.
Yeah.
Because that's what the agency feels that needs to happen. But then some are actually, kind of popping the adoption support workers into one team and saying, you are just responsible for adoption support. So
specialising.
Yeah.
Which is, but you can argue the benefits of that. And I was having a conversation today with some social workers, some adoption social workers, like real social workers, and proper ones, yeah. And they were saying how there's a perception within social work of adoption social workers, which is the twin set and pearls, And I have been flippant in the past and accused of not liking social workers, but one thing that I've said is, it's like where you send old social workers to die, which is horrible. But there's this idea that, but I was talking to a friend who's been a social worker for 40 years, and she said adoption social work was always seen as the vanguard of social work. It was always seen as you work your way up to it, and it is the peak of your career.
Yeah.
And now it's not seen as that. It's seen as somewhere where you go for an easy ride.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because I'll tell you what's interesting. When we first adopted, that was exactly our experience. They were all social workers who were a lot older, and they were starting to retire. Interestingly, that same team now, they're all really young. But their experience, the experience I've got of all of them, and they don't support us in any way, shape or form now.
Yeah.
But I, obviously still continue to talk to them and work quite closely with them on some things. They all have amazing, abilities to support their adopters.
Social work powers.
Fantastic. Yeah, they do. Honestly, they're a revelation. And in actual fact, two of them joined the adoption team as adoption social workers and have gone on to adopt.
Oh, well, that says something.
Yeah, but it does, doesn't it? And they're just amazing. So yeah, you're right. I'd say the majority do, but actually I'm seeing, and bearing in mind I deal with a number of the agencies and the local authorities, I'm seeing a lot of younger people coming into adoption now. Whether it's of any interest to them, or maybe it's just, I don't know, maybe there's a lot of job satisfaction in it when they're getting it right. I don't know.
Well, I mean, my perception was when I was a student in local authority doing whatever, that it was seen as the golden ticket. Because it was a sense of you continue to do you're doing proper social work, but you're not getting this level of stress and, the high caseloads. You might get high caseloads, but you're not.
Yeah.
This level of risk that you're managing is not necessarily there, which I think then does a disservice when you look at the issues that some adopters face. So that kind of people are thinking, oh, this is the nice end of social work, and you go into situations where families are really struggling.
Yeah.
And that can be an odd combination. Anyway, I feel like we're
kind of.
This is our own podcast. What about Mark?
Yeah,
Mark.
Oh well, just delete the interview. It's
yeah.
fine,
Anyway, Mark was really good, and he said some stuff.
Was.
He said some stuff.
Yeah.
The end. The end. Oh, bye. You know.
When you say bye like that, you know what I think of is Rainbow. You know, when the bye now, and Zippy and Jeff bungle.
Bungle. Oh, my name's George.
Oh my days! That's exactly what it reminds me. Anyway.
Half of the podcast won't have a clue what we're on about because they're all under 40.
I think they will. Anyway, yeah, he was good. I really enjoyed speaking to him, and like Beth, I could have talked to him for hours. I just find it really difficult to focus on maybe 4 or 5 questions with our guests because they're all so interesting. And I keep saying, we'll have to have you back. I have to have you back. People don't want to listen to the same people like week after week, including us, I should guess.
Wow.
It's really difficult. It's really difficult to just, I think that we're always looking for all this knowledge. And I hope that we kind of ask the right questions on behalf of listeners.
We give people just enough to frustrate people.
Yeah, I know, but that's quite frustrating for me as well, I feel, because, I just could speak to these people for days and days and days and days. And I think it's the passion that we've all got for the topic.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think people who come into adoption tend to live it.
Yeah.
The one thing I have to comment about the interview, and you'll hear at the end, is that there's a frisson of danger as we get towards the last 10 minutes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And that danger is because there was a janitor coming round the place where I was working. I was at work and the office shuts at 10. And so I was trying to politely wrap up as we got towards the end hour, but it becomes quite evident that I'm...
It does.
Yeah.
And I noticed, and that started to stress me out because I thought, right, we need to get rid of him in 5 minutes. Oh, we've only got 4 minutes. Oh, we've got 3 minutes. Right, shut up.
Yeah.
But,
we'll leave all that in.
When you started putting your jacket on and switching lights off while you had your headphones on, you were speaking into the thing. It was kind of...
It was a bit off-putting, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, John Humphreys wouldn't do that, would he?
No, nor would David Dimbleby.
Or John Paxman. Jeremy Paxman. His brother John. So I don't think we've got anything to add to it. I think it speaks for itself, and we've trawled over a bit. But I have to say, I'd love to have an hour with him and to get him to tell his personal story. Because that would be. I think we should arrange that. We should next time we're in London. We should call at him and say, "You need to."
We should get out. We'll get out. Get him a beer
on the Hoy and tell the whole story of his adoption experience, because that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes. And for those of you who don't know, he is on Twitter. And
what's his name?
If you just, his name is Mark Owers.
No, you mean Mark Owers?
Whatever. No, wait a minute, I'll tell you.
Is it Mark Owers or Owers?
No, will you stop that? You did this last week, and you made me quite angry, actually, because of your pronunciation. So he is Mark, M-A-R-K, O-W-E-R-S 73 on Twitter. So I'm assuming he was born in 1973.
Your powers of deduction are bordering on sinister.
Yeah. But give him a follow. He's a really nice guy. You'll really enjoy the interview, we hope.
And he looks a little bit like Kurt Russell in The Thing.
I don't know who. Oh, Kurt Russell. I know who he is.
In The Thing.
I don't know The Thing, no.
Anyway, that's probably... probably. And if the CVA are listening, I am available for work. I do children's parties.
Well, they've got a chief exec's post that's just become vacant. Yeah.
I can do escapology. I can get out of a straitjacket, and I've got one upstairs.
You're fitting quite well then.
Yeah, I have. You don't believe me, do you?
I really don't need to know. I really don't need to know.
I did dabble with escapology as a young man.
Oh my god. It's the fact that you said I've got a straitjacket upstairs.
In the boudoir. No, I have got a straitjacket. I've got 20 foot of chain and no, this has gone so wrong.
You should have shut up before you started. Really.
Anyway, so Mark Owers.
Yeah. And enjoy.
And I'll tell you about my escapology next time on the next podcast.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, enjoy Mark Owers. And you, Scott, you have a fantastic week, and I'll speak to you soon.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Well, hello, Mark, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Al. Thank you for having me. It's an honour. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Mark. It's an honour. Why is it an honour? Well, no, we'll take that, actually. We'll just take it.
Yeah.
Don't say anymore.
We'll not start with questions that are impossible to answer.
Andrew and Beth, and you have us all in fear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
No, you don't. You're beautiful. You're beautiful men, both of you.
Thank you. Just on the inside, though.
Yeah.
Now, Mark, people probably don't know who you are. But if you Google your name, you come up everywhere. So, Mark, can you tell us who you are and what you do? Because we were trying to describe you before we called you. Who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Mark Owers. I'm 45 this year.
Well done.
And I'm a social worker by background. I like to think that everything I do is informed by good social work values. And for the last kind of 10, 15 years, I've been what I think is a great job. I've been fortunate to be squeezed right in between policy folk. So people at DFE mostly, although I spent a bit of time in central government in the Treasury and Cabinet Office, and people who deliver children's services in local authorities, the voluntary sector, or in the private sector, the independent sector. And there aren't many jobs like mine, and I get to kind of roam around the system trying to make things better for children, really.
Wow. That's really interesting. How did you get to there from being a social worker?
So I was in Haringey in the youth offending team, kind of 2004-ish. And I took on a part-time role with the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales, which was responsible for overseeing performance of youth justice things.
Right.
And I ended up going full-time with them and leading an internal consultancy team. So that was when I really kind of got a sense of working with lots of different local authorities. And from there I went to a unit called the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit in the Cabinet Office. That sounds really highfalutin. You've made that sound like really easy, but that sounds like a big deal. Well, it was. I couldn't believe I got the job. And then when I found myself in the Treasury with some of the country's brightest young things and old things indeed, it was really, really odd. I probably had as high emotional intelligence as anyone else, and I sometimes felt like I was the office cat. Everyone came up and kind of played with me, and because I had a different take on the world. But actually, they came to value it. And one of the best things about the many good things about the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit, we had a great mix of really, really high-flying civil servants, some of the best of the best, some of the best kind of management consultancy folk, and people who'd been involved in delivery and kind of understood what it was like to be a doctor or teach or be a social worker. And when you bring those three together, which was under the Labour government, it ended when the coalition government came in. Yeah. That was when government really cared about kind of delivery and was involved in what was happening and understanding and wanting to know what was happening. Right. And from there, I've just had national roles, so with the NSPCC or as the chief executive of the Consortium of Voluntary Adoption Agencies. So I've just been in a fortunate part of the delivery system where I see more of it than most.
So you've seen quite a lot of changes over. I mean, you've seen a lot of governmental changes, personnel changes. But across that spectrum, you've seen a lot of changes in adoption. I mean, as I was thinking what to talk to you about, I thought there's actually so many strands we could go down. So what are the key changes do you think have happened over that period of 15 years, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I only really came to the adoption reform.
He's gone again. What him?
It was in 2000.
Right.
Hello?
Hello, you mildly disappeared again. Just as you get interesting, it breaks down. It's a government filter. It's some sort of Illuminati plot. That's what it is. You're just about to tell us the name of who holds the cash, and then it breaks out.
It's Scott.
It's Scott. Oh, that explains everything.
Sue Armstrong Brown's got it all.
Sue Armstrong, she's got it all. She's mega bucks.
Oh, well, I need to get a bloody pay rise.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, kind of maybe stepping away from that, because I know that you have your own adoption story. So you said you'd be happy to share a bit of that with us. Tell us your own adoption story before we get into all the adoption and fostering and stuff like that.
Well, we have 5 children, and we started off with 2 adopted children.
Right.
And we spent 6 or 7 years trying to have our own kids, and we said goodbye to our fertility and adopted through an agency called Norwood, a voluntary adoption agency, and we just fell in love with our 2 adopted children, and they've been with us now nearly 6 years.
Right.
They're a half sibling group, a boy and a girl, an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. They're both wonderful, and we then ended up having triplets. So we went from 0 to 5 children in less than 18 months.
Hang on. Stop there, right. In my head, I can imagine this conversation where your partner comes to you and she says, Mark, there's something I need to tell you. So what happened? Just explain that to me. I know what happened.
Well, we knew she was pregnant, but we didn't know she was pregnant with 2 or 3. We just thought she was pregnant, and she actually went for a checkup when I was not around because she was anxious about things, and we had this kind of text exchange where she was actually in the room being examined, and the first thing he said was, "There's one," and she thought that was an odd way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then he went, "Yep, there's another one." And she was relaying all of this to me, and then he said, "There's a third one." And I was just sitting there looking at the text, thinking, "So is it an ectopic pregnancy? Is it a molar pregnancy?
Yeah.
Is it what? It was just all really, really bizarre, to be honest."
Wow.
And we still can't believe that we're blessed with 5 gorgeous children. And we have such a kind of wonderful way of rolling, really, as a family, and it's so rich in its diversity, and it's just amazing the way in which they all, as a sibling group, get on, the way we relate to each other, the way in which we kind of, we're taking on each other's traits, the way in which the triplets talk about adoption, the way in which the Callum and Gracie talk about their siblings and their and their role as the kind of 1 and 2, if you like, which is often not the way in adoption, which I find fascinating.
Wow.
The way in which they feel really responsible for their siblings and the relationship, and the way in which they know that of all the children in the world we could have chosen, we chose them.
Yeah.
But then we had some more. Which, they understand that wasn't the way in which we expected it to happen, but the way in which it works so well.
Wow.
It's crazy challenge.
Yeah.
But it's just magical. I mean, we just love it. We looked at our wedding video recently, and I said in my speech, now it's time to have lots of bambinos. And after spending 7 really dark and painful years watching everyone around us almost with ease, almost as easily as having a shower, kind of banging out babies, we, after a 18-month period, went from none to like more than anyone else we knew. So it's just been a crazy ride, really.
It's 18 months. Blimey.
Yeah.
18 months. Can you imagine? I mean, you know how difficult it was. Even I think when the older two of mine were placed with us, it took us 18 months, 2 years just to get used to having them with us. Never mind having 5. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, and you remember that we often talk about that first 4 or 5 months. We were absolute when Callum and Grace were placed with us. We were dead on our feet. I've never been so tired. I've never been so kind of drained and exhausted. And of course, we, after about 15 months, then had to kind of entertain multiples as well.
But I mean, it's just.
I don't. Do you know what? It has to be one of those situations, I think, and you might disagree. I don't know, but I think you would have to live that life to actually get how you cope with that, because I don't think anybody could comprehend how you would go from 0 to 5 and having all that series of unknown beforehand, and then go through that process, and then being and then my God. It's number 3. Thank you very much. That's
But it's just been. You must have just been everyone you talk to. So, by the way, everyone's just got used to this idea of 2 children, and that's a big challenge. And then your parents, your friends, your family, your work set up. By the way, we're gonna.
Imagine conversation. How long is it since I've seen 2 years? Oh, I've got 5 kids now.
we've had that conversation with lots of people.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So I was just going to say, rewind it back a little bit. I mean, obviously we understand why you adopted, but was there, were you interested in adoption back then, in the way that you have become involved in adoption, or was it just, this is a way for us to become parents? I don't mean that in a
No.
I just mean,
I totally understand that. I always wanted to adopt. Right from, I got involved in family support and off-school clubs and breakfast clubs when I was 15, and I just worked with children, and I used to work with 2 children on a one-to-one basis, who were adopted but kind of needed time away with Tourette syndrome and had really quite kind of complex needs, and I love the idea of it. And my wife Varney also liked the idea of it, but wanted to have her own children, and I sometimes think if we hadn't done it this way round, I don't know whether I would have got to adopt. And it's almost, I kind of love the fact I was able to adopt first, and then we had our own children miraculously. I mean, it was just unbelievable the way it happened. So I've always been interested in it, and then I went from being on my adoption leave and some of the kind of most intense times of my life, and most euphoric, to that moment when you kind of rock up and the foster care opens the door for the first time. Callum actually kind of ran out and called mum and daddy straight away. It was just unbelievable. I mean, Gracie hung onto the foster carer's leg for about 2 days before she'd even raise her head and look at us. But Callum was all over us from the off. But I then went back to my job at the Treasury, and then I did a review for number 10 on adoption, which followed Martin Nair's piece in the Times in August that year. So Martin came to he was working with number 10, and they were concerned about the extent to which the Department for Education, or DCF as it was, had enough of a handle on adoption, and essentially invited us to do a review. So I was living and breathing adoption at work and at home in quite an intense way. I mean, I spent 8 to 12 weeks just roaming around the system with for BAF and AUK at the top to kind of local authorities on the ground to adopt, and it was everything. And I've never really, both obviously personally but professionally, I've never left adoption since.
Yeah.
That's a remarkable story. I can't get my head around it, to be honest. I mean, the one thing I can remember from my question that they said to us, there's no strings involved with adoption, but you really, really have rocked that statement to its core. That's just pretty awesome. Everything else seems to really come back to that.
That sounds interesting, actually.
Yeah, that's more about your life. That's much more interesting.
Well, I go to work to relax. If I'm honest, I love my job because it's time for me, but also it's about you're trying to make the system better. And we have ups and downs like any adoptive family or any family. And I'm sure we've got more challenges ahead. But being able to try and make the system better is really rewarding. It's great. It's a great job. I love it. And it has, a real kind of resonance with everything that we do as a family and what I do in my professional life. So I'm really lucky.
Yeah.
Crikey, yeah.
I think the two of us we're not the same, on reviews of number 10 and stuff like that, but I think, we're almost 24/7 in it as well. But actually, do you know what? I wouldn't change that, because it's just, whether it's trying to change the system or supporting our peers or whatever it is that we're doing, I think when you're in that environment, it's just so fulfilling. That's how I feel anyway. And we might not get it right every time, but it's just, it's just what we should have been kind of from the off. But it's just that it took a life journey to get there.
Well, and I mean, I think that's, look, joking aside at the start about the way in which you terrorise the sector with your interviews, but it's clear you love what you do, and I think we're really fortunate that there are some really, really impressive people in and adoption and fostering who are just wonderful. And I think we're part of that group, and because we're driven by family, which is quite simply about helping to make children lives better. And I spend most of my time trying to make complex simple. And it's simple is, how do we help people? How do we just help people to be as happy as they possibly can be? And how do we do it in a really helpful way? Can we do it in a genuine and authentic way, where we cut through all the red tape and the procedure and the anxiety and the risk averseness and the systems and the processes and the lack of confidence and lack of competence, and just really just put kind of relationships and trust at the heart of what we do. And all I try and do is kind of simplify it and declutter it and just kind of put the simple bit right in the middle, and that's children.
Yeah, which is good social work, isn't it? Which you talked about before. Having those values puts you in a unique position in some of those environments, doesn't it?
Yeah, and what we've done is we've overcomplicated it. I'm not the first person. Monroe's obviously said it. Others have said it, we need a system which enables social workers to be social workers, to be able to kind of make decisions, to feel able to take risks, to be available to people within an environment of good support. And then after we need to work out what else do we need? What kind of accountability framework do we need to enable social workers to be the best they possibly can be? And we've got just so much stuff in the system, which of course has been introduced because of bad cases making bad laws. There's just so much there now. I think it's difficult for social workers to feel like they're responsible.
To see the wood for the trees.
We've robbed them. Yeah, and we've robbed them of that kind of creativity, that kind of focus on children, that ability to just, be freer in the way in which they think about helping.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you maintain that kind of focus in spite of where you are. And one thing, it's not a question I had planned, but I see a lot of within this sector, sort of fostering and adoption, there's kind of a rise of activism, and there's quite a lot of cynicism's maybe is too strong a word, but there's a lot of people who've had a really rough ride, and out of that there's an element of them campaigning for better. How do you think that fits in? Because often can be quite abrasive, and often it's abrasive at people like you. I read some of the stuff on the Stocktake, and it was quite, it was really forthright, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, but I think that's a good thing. I think there's some really difficult debates and challenges to be had, and there's no point reviewing a national system like the fostering system in England and not kind of asking some difficult questions. And too often we try and arrive at a consensual kind of view of the world, which you end up pleasing nobody if you try and please everybody. And actually, if you put children right at the heart and you ask questions about what works and what doesn't work, you quite quickly kind of come to themes. But of course, the extent to which foster carers should be paid, the extent to which we're properly, when they need the support, where and how, the extent to which foster carers are professionalised, the extent to which independent fostering agencies do or don't make excessive profits. These are all big issues that we need to grapple with, because when there's noise around things like that, too much energy is diverted away from the nuts and bolts of working directly with children and families. There's a lot of energy, a lot of negative energy being spent on these things. But of course, there was a genuine reason why people feel they are not being looked after. They're not being valued. They're not being respected. They're not being cared for in the way that they should. They feel like they're being taken advantage of.
But even that was really contentious, because one of the issues you raised was around how foster, about reframing foster carers as foster parents. But even that kind of just raised all kinds of passions in people about professionalism.
I know.
And do you think that there's a room for both? Or do we have to have kind of this binary position where you are a professional or not a professional?
I think we need a system that is entirely adaptable and flexible to the needs of children. And I think there's room for more than just two. There's room for multiple versions.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the challenges with foster care is that there are so many different types of foster care. And even in the types of foster care, so if you're talking about remand foster care and parent and child foster care or emergency placements, even within those titles, you have people who've been doing it a day and people who've been doing it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And within that, you have people who are paid and people who don't. So, of course, the difference is multifaceted. And we need a system that properly respects, values and celebrates all of that difference. Because children all come with different needs, which, of course, change constantly as well.
Yeah.
That's quite a difficult thing to do. Some local authorities have absolutely nailed it. And the way in which there was one authority I went to there were a number of authorities I went to as part of the stock take, where everybody I spoke to, from foster carers to the director to members to children who had left care to children who were still in care, they talked about how people looked after them and helped them and wanted to do their best for them, going the extra mile and being genuinely interested and listening, and all the sorts of things I would expect if I was a Martian and I landed on this planet. And I said, what's a children's service for? And so often, for lots of valid reasons, but that's not the way in which they present, or parts of their services don't present in that way. Because of thresholds, because of caseloads, because of lack of confidence, because of fear of making mistakes, because of Ofsted in judgments, because of commissioning, because of poor leadership, because of performance management frameworks, etc., etc. There's lots of good reasons. And
I find it really interesting. That's my day job is fostering, and I see a spectrum of stuff. I see from outstanding work to really quite the very opposite. And it's so hard to kind of put a finger on why that is, and whether that is just individual practitioner, right up to a systemic issue within a borough or a team or a local, or a local authority. I was interested in the stock take because there was specific ones that people really looked at. One was around independent viewing officers, which kind of raised hackles nationally. When it works, when it doesn't. In some ways, we're never going to sit here, on a Tuesday night. We're not going to resolve that issue. But what was the response to stock take from people like Fostering Network, Top Fostering, the different agencies? Do you think they're going to take on board what you've said?
Well, a lot of what we said is around practice. A good half of the recommendations are around practice issues, and they can be changed by the sector. They're all within the gift of the sector.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, and this I think plays to the kind of over-proceduralisation and the lack of kind of risk-taking. But of course, if social workers are responsible for air traffic control, we'd never see an aeroplane take off again. And there's something about the way in which we kind of have that kind of environment where we're able to take risks. And they don't need to wait for the government to do some of these things. So, for example, we have a huge number of children, often with more complex needs, whether because they're older or because of their strengths, difficulties, sometimes issues in the independent fostering placements. And it's all about supply at the moment. We don't have enough foster carers for too much choice. So IFAs have a lot of control. Now, if they all said, we're not taking any children unless we have a strengths-based referral, we're not taking any children unless you give us cast iron guarantees that from day one, delegated authority is sorted. We're not going to let you come to our houses for our foster carers anytime you want to do the reviews without having a proper consultation with foster carers and thinking carefully about the time of day that means on the foster family. There are simple things. On the other side, we have local authorities saying that some independent foster agencies are charging them too much.
Yeah.
Well, local authorities have all of the money and all of the children. Don't use the placements then. if it's on both sides, there are things that we've done for years that we actually don't have to do.
Yeah.
Now, it's all good me saying that, as you say, on a Tuesday night, but they have legal responsibilities to kind of make the best for these children. And there are things that can be done. And in the best performing authorities and external agencies, whether they're like VAs or residential units, you generally have a whole ethos of quality. You might have, one or two people who are not performing as well as they can, but generally everyone understands that. And of course, in areas where they're not so good, it's generally lots of things aren't good, but there will be some good things there too.
Yeah.
So the way in which you understand practice improvement and transformation, and particularly around sector-led improvement, which I think is an important part of the way to help everyone get to the best.
Yeah.
But in terms of some of those kind of national organisations that you named, there are some really tricky issues to do around foster carers, and which they are professionals or not. I think, as Mark and I said in the report, foster carers are unbelievable. That what they do and how they do it is amazing. It's just amazing. And unless you have been a parent, and I think if you have a child that has quite complex needs, whether that's through adoption, fostering, or in a kind of, in your family, but biologically, we all know that can be really challenging. Actually, I was a social worker before I had children, and when I used to do my assessments, the way I used to think about things was very different then. Now I know what it feels like to want to throw a child out a window because they don't go to sleep or have been crying for 3 hours and there's nothing you can do and you haven't slept yourself all night. Now, of course, I didn't and haven't and won't throw any of my children out the window.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Good. But there's something about the way in which we kind of understand that. And so foster carers do an amazing job. But nearly all of the ones we spoke to, they said first and foremost they do it because they want to make a difference. And they talk about the children in their care, in their homes, as their family members. They talk about them as if they were talking about their own children more often than not. And I think just talking about employment law and talking about professional status to try and fix some of the practice issues misses the point. But I think we can respect foster carers and value foster carers and support foster carers by really kind of understanding why they are doing it and ensuring that their rights are enshrined in the way in which we work with them, without them thinking about whether they need to take their leave and what that means at 2 o'clock in the morning when a baby's crying, whether they're on the clock or not.
But do you think there's a? I mean, I see the referrals coming into my organisation, and they range from, fairly straightforward, what you would call a straightforward kind of fostering situation, to some really complex, high need, complex risks. Situation. Do you think that there's a potential to have some carers who are professionals and have that status, and some who is that
absolutely
so that's within our gift potentially.
We talk about a tier-based, skills-based, and payment-based system which many local authorities operate to good effect. When I was in Haringey, I used to manage our remand fostering service. You not hear me?
Yes.
Oh, it's the thumbs you're doing it. You can hear me.
Another edit, look.
I can't believe that.
These two silly buggers are like doing thumbs up, everybody. Anyway.
That'll never see the light of day.
The remand foster carers that I used to manage and support were full-time employees and they got paid the same amount whether they had a child in placement or not on a retainer. And they attended all of the same training as the social workers and the team managers, and it was a wonderful service. And they were the high end of fostering. And we absolutely need foster carers who are employed, who are paid, and who get the best possible training and clinical supervision.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning because I do our duty phone, and it said, we've got a young person here, we need a carer for them. And you go, that's fair enough. What's the story there? Well, they physically assaulted their last foster carer. Can we have someone tonight? And you go, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Where are they now? Oh, they're in the police. We're just getting them released from prison, from the police station. You go, well, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. There's a high chance that they're pretty, dysregulated, really vulnerable, and And you're going to go, you're just asking the wrong questions. Is fostering the right place for this child? So
Yeah.
the needs of children I don't think the needs of children have got any greater, but there's some really high need children out there, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of came across that issue constantly, and it was in the literature review as well that the FE commissioned around the extent to which children's needs have become more complex over time. Well, I don't think they have. I think we understand their needs in a much more sophisticated way than ever before.
Yeah.
And we understand what that means over time. We understand what it means after the adoption order in their kind of adolescent years, for example, and the high levels of violence that too many adoptive families have to deal with alone. And of course, that means we all ask more searching questions of whether we want to do that as a foster carer or as an adopter, and also what that means as a social worker or as a therapist or a psychologist or a teacher in terms of the way in which we try and support them properly.
Yeah.
And that's why we've got a bit of a challenge on sophisticacy around having enough adopters and enough foster carers, because we know more about their needs and because we know how to meet their needs. We also hear through social media far too many stories where needs aren't being met.
Yeah.
And of course, that means people are thinking, well, there's two issues there. One is you're telling me this child is going to have quite profound needs over the lifespan. And I also know with good authority that I'm likely not to get what I need. Well, so okay, we don't have as many people coming forward in need to help some of these children.
Yeah. Scott. No, I was just I mean, you've led us into adoption. I know that Scott's got some questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say there as well. It's funny because you're talking about social media there, and you think it's that. I don't get me wrong. I totally agree that some needs to be met, but you also think it's. Assuming you're going to answer this the way I want you to answer it, if not, then fair enough. But do you think also social media has become a kind of a venting area as well? So some people do get support, but actually they're just really frustrated by systems and red tape and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is brilliant. I mean, the way in which we kind of have support groups and the fact we're doing this, hopefully people will take something from this and that's helpful. The fact that you raised the issue today, Scott, about the Calderdale fostering advert on the back of a bus, and there's kind of lots of different ways in which we're kind of raising issues and dealing with things, and it's a force for good. And also the whole kind of debate about Facebook and contact is, I think, a fascinating one, because there are some people who say, well, Facebook's caused us a load of pain and grief. No, we've long had a challenge with the way in which we understand children's loss and destinies. And all Facebook has done is expose flaws in practice in the way in which we understand it and what we do about it.
Absolutely.
It's not Facebook's fault.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
And actually, I'm glad, because what Facebook is doing and what other social media platforms is doing is forcing us to think long and hard about opening adoption up and treating life story work and contact after adoption and also contact pre-adoption, particularly what we're learning around concurrency placements, fostering to adopt, around the way in which foster carers wanting to adopt, how they understand the vulnerabilities of birth parents, they themselves are feeling in terms of not knowing whether they're going to be able to keep the child they are falling in love with, and what that and having to manage contact 3 or 4 times a week, to then being able to think about contact when an adoption order is made in a different way. Yeah. We were talking at a regional adoption a contact event recently, where one of the RAs has started to look at letterbox contact, and they can see the difference in intimacy and quality of information in those letters that have been written after concurrency and fostering to adopt placements, and those where there has been no contact. Well, you're actually writing to someone you know.
It's a person, isn't it? Not just a spectre.
Yeah. And it's an absolute game changer for me. And whilst I think it's going to be a big problem in terms of trying to attract more people to adoption, then we absolutely need to modernise adoption in this country, and we absolutely need to think about what contact after adoption means, but also what that means, the way in which we work with birth families as part of proceedings, the way in which we equip frontline social workers to be able to deal with birth families and what it means to lose children and keep in contact with children after adoption, what it obviously means for adopters, and what it means for adoption support agencies. It's a massive piece of work.
I've got a proposal that we have, and I've muted this with an academic who may have been on the last podcast or may not have. A national contact service, like electronic portal that is for all families. It's neutral, so the families feel able to engage with it because it's not the person who took the child from them. And it's an electronic system like Facebook for contacting. That's a really ugly way of saying it, but that's something. So can you do that, Mark, for us?
We'll try and do that by Friday. If we can.
Yeah. Okay.
And we'll sit it with you, Scott, at UK.
Right. Boom.
Yeah. Well, not just you. I mean, sorry, I'm thinking there's someone else at the organisation that can help you.
The T-boy.
Yeah. Sorry, just on that point, there is a really important place for technology in some of this. And as I know Beth told you on the podcast, because I've listened to it, we know that some of the best contact is the contact that is done directly. And we never know about it. And already one of the regional adoption agencies is sifting through something like 1,700 kind of letterbox arrangements and looking at which ones can be done directly, where the RIA is taken out of the equation entirely.
Excellent.
And that's the kind of thing we need to think about. How do biological families keep in contact? How do substitute families need to keep in contact?
Yeah.
What is the essence of family life? And why do we think family life is different? Because there's this piece of paper I've got in my safe which says adoption order. Or because, there's an SGO.
Yeah.
We for too long defined the way in which we work with people by their legal status or their journey in and out of the care system, as opposed to thinking about what's the essence of family life that we're trying to replicate in all instances. That's not to say, if we call a foster carer a foster parent, that we are taking anything away from their biological parent or from an adoptive parent. Or what we're saying is children need to be parented more often than not in their environments when it's a family setting.
Yeah.
We're not saying you're taking one from the other. We're putting the child at the centre, Martin and I certainly, when we talk about foster parents and foster families, and crucially, the team around the foster family. I don't think the foster carer is part of the team around the child. The bloody child lives with them.
Yeah.
It's a totally different relationship.
Yeah. They're not a team, they're a family. I have one family that I know that fosters, and their whole family fosters. Grandmas, aunties, uncles, and that's why they're successful, because it's a community. It's a genuine, you prove you care, you get 25 people.
Yeah, because how good, collective families, or large families with good networks, extended families, that's how they work.
Yeah. Yeah, and, like you probably do and I do. I've got people in my life who take my kids for an afternoon, and,
And also, Al, when we go to my grandma's house, I'm allowed to sleep on the floor, right, at Christmas. And sometimes we can have 25 people in the building, and there's probably all sorts of health and safety issues. And if a social worker turned up, they'd want to know why I didn't have a 3-tog sleeping bag on the floor up in the northeast.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, when families come together, that's how they roll. So why can't a foster carer take a 22-year-old foster child in the summer when all their friends at university have left and they would otherwise be left in the university town with no digs because everyone's gone home? Why can't they go home and sleep on the sofa without being bloody police checked?
Yeah.
No, it's important to be police checked, but the point I'm making is how do we replicate family life?
Yeah. Yeah, we use common sense and we apply sensible rules, and we go, well, you can sleep on the couch for a night because we're all together, but we're not going to leave you there for 6 months.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a big difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you just, I thought you were going to segue into the RAA discussion, but then you went back into this one. I want to move.
He's freestyling. Freestyling.
Yeah, you're teasing me with it. So tell us about your involvement with RAAs, because obviously I know quite a bit about them. I've been involved in a lot of them, but when did you start kind of helping helping tea boy. When did you start making cups of tea for the RAA projects?
So I've made loads of cups of tea for them. It's one of the things I get right, I think, on the RAA program. It's obviously not without its challenges, which we'll come on to. But I started to get involved with the demonstration projects. So those RAAs that were defined by DFE as demonstrator projects, and were given a little bit more money to do a bit of trailblazing. And I actually, so I was a member of the leadership board, and was at CVA as the chief executive. And then I actually took a year and a half out to be a full-time dad. And then I've basically come back to the world of work on doing different bits of contract work, one of which is for DFE. So they asked me to help them with the RA program, and specifically to help refocus it from what essentially was a challenge of being about the form rather than the function of an RAA. So the program started off about legal entity and kind of the kind of organisational shape and weird and wonderful delivery models. Yeah. And there was less attention on the essence of good practice. So I was asked to provide support and challenge both to the department and to the individual RA projects as they were thinking about setting up. That then evolved, and as RAA started to go live, and of course West Yorkshire's been live since last April, you know that, Scott. We split the cohorts up into the RA leader group. So those heads of service that are leading an RAA, I meet with them monthly to essentially kind of facilitate them coming together to derive mutual support from each other, to identify some of the kind of common issues, to think about what we do with it, so group problem solving, but also crucially to think about what kind of connectivity do we need from them as system leaders. So how do RAs and VAAs need to work together to make sure children move around the system without delay, and make sure wherever you live and wherever you move to, that you get the right kind of support when you need it.
So, do you, because I've picked up on one thing you said there, because obviously, and this was one of my frustrations actually, sitting in some of the meetings with the RAA projects, was they were too focused on the delivery models, and who would host, and will we have to do 2P and all this, and how much is the system going to cost them? Do you think that was maybe a little bit too late in terms of your input into that? For some, not for all, but for some. Do you think that was just something that went, you know what, bumholes, we've got that a little bit late? So,
there's no doubt about it. It's been a massive frustration. Look, I mean, let's be honest here. The RAA program is difficult for lots of reasons, and trying to force collaboration through legislation is always going to be tricky. But of course, if you don't force collaboration, do you get collaboration? Is the big kind of question here. Yeah. And we, everything we're asking in the RA program is against what local authorities and VAAs kind of have always done. Local government legislation, local democracy, local government funding is all about the local authority boundary. Corporate parenting is all about the local authority boundary. Regulation and inspection is all about the local authority boundary. So when you then say to them, you lot, you five, or you, however you define it, and we want you to be busy mates, we want you to put all the same money in the pot, and we want you to kind of just trust that someone else is going to run it for you as a shared service. Yeah. Well, they make odd bedfellows at the best of times. What we do know is the RAs that have gone live, the earliest, have mostly been able to do so, as well as lots of hard work and skill and determination, but because of the long-standing, trusting relationships they have with each other. And it comes back to trust and relationships. It's a relationship business. Yeah. And they basically can say to each other, without even turning the lights on, or without having to look each other in the eye, when they say they want to work in partnership, they know what that means because they've done it. Yeah. They believe in it. It's authentic. And when they come to a difficult bit about oh, I used to buy more adopters than I'm going to in the future, so I'm going to lose money.
Yeah.
They don't quibble over it. They quite happily say, actually, I'm really good at adoption and you're not so good. If I run it, maybe your adoption can be really good too. And actually, if for a long time I've sold all my adopters to you because you live in a really kind of tricky demographic area where there's lots of poverty and small houses, and you won't get lots of adopters in that area. Not to say that small houses and people in poverty don't adopt, but the point I'm making is there is a reason, because of the demographic, that it's difficult. Well, I've essentially made money out of your demographic challenges.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, if we think about the nation's most vulnerable children, isn't it a good thing that I bring these adopters to you?
Yeah.
Now, they're all kind of moral reasons, and no local authority, DCS or league member in the country would argue against that. When you're going into a partnership with, say, Birmingham, for example, who have had lots of attention, or previously Doncaster or Rochdale or now Nottinghamshire, where you've got some really serious issues, and you're a brilliant adoption service, and it's going to cost you more, and you're worrying about getting poorer quality, well, that's a really difficult decision.
Yeah.
And then when you then wrap up what do you do with voluntary adoption agencies in that, where we historically have had a spot purchase model where we buy from them when we have a brilliant match. How do we contract for that? Because once you start contracting for that and having a firmer relationship, you're essentially denying the kind of the matching bit of it.
Yeah.
You can't say we want 10 adopters from you every year and we'll have a contract for 5 years if the children I have and the adopters you have don't fit together.
Yeah.
So there's some really big challenges in this piece. And actually, the fact we've even landed one RAA, never mind now have 10 running, is unbelievable because it's cutting edge. It's a system first. We now have shared services cross local authority working with some of the country's most vulnerable children, and they can see from the hub, from the centre of the RA, they can see variability across local authorities in a way we wouldn't have seen before. So if I say to RAAs, which of your 5 local authorities has a no delay culture and which ones don't, they can tell me immediately. Because the way in which a local authority focuses on avoiding unnecessarily delay successfully is from the top to the bottom of the organisation being relentlessly focused on children's needs. And not all authorities are able to do that for lots of kind of good reasons. And RAAs can now see that. RAAs are also starting to go into locality teams to talk about the impact of trauma and attachment issues with staff that are agency where there's high turnover, where they're starting to help them think about what that means for the way in which the court proceeding reports are written, the way in which the child permanency report is written, the way in which they're thinking about the support needs as part of linking and matching, in a way that we didn't see before. We saw it where adoption teams were really well located with locality teams, but it was really variable. And now we've got the opportunity to use scale to kind of drive up standards to the best and to be able to iron out that variability in the system.
Yeah, I mean, can I come back at you, because I think that you're clearly a champion for it, and you're part of the system of making it happen. But what are the criticisms for some might be that are a local, if you're a local authority social worker, you're getting swallowed up. If you're a manager, you may be losing your job. If you're an adopter, you don't know who your contact point is, and your contact point might be 30, 40, 50 miles away. Your training might be 30 miles away. Are those criticisms ones that you're hearing, and are they being addressed?
So all of those are absolutely legitimate. And whilst I am charged with making the best of the RA programme, just be clear, I'm on record as saying this isn't where I would have started.
Right.
What I think is really interesting about the whole adoption reform agenda, and I will answer your question now, is...
You sound like a politician when you say that.
yeah. I was listening to Andrew Christie as well, and his podcast, and I thought he sounded like a good politician.
He was, yeah.
For me, there are different things that need to be done at different levels of the system, okay? And so a register, you probably only need one of them. But the way in which you do assessments, you need to be able to go into family's home and do an assessment in their street. You need to be in their house, don't you?
Yeah.
And then there are things around kind of seeing pools of adopter where you're doing linking and matching, where we know if you don't have a big enough pool, then you don't necessarily have the kind of choice that we know children can benefit from. So there are certain things that need to be done at different levels. And if an adoptive family feels like their support is miles away and it's not accessible, well, that's not right. That's not what regionalisation is about. And that absolutely needs to be addressed. And of course, the way in which some of the RAs are working is they are having a greater concentration of expertise and adoption support than they would have had previously, but they are struggling with the geography and the delivery models and the way in which that works. There, of course, are lots of social workers and managers who are kind of being moved around with lots of uncertainty and lots of change, which is impacting on their ability to answer the phone, to turn the lights on, to know how to turn the bloody computer on.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of challenges which will have a direct impact on the quality of adoption services. There is no doubt about it. And in some areas, it will get worse before it gets better because of the extent of this change programme. Mm-hmm. But Al, was it right for us to have 152 local authorities doing 5,000 adoptions a year plus 28 voluntary adoption agencies? Some adoption teams were doing less than 10 adoptions a year. The cost of those teams, the expertise in those teams, and the extent to which we were able to harness the best of the best was really challenging when you divide 180 agencies with 5,000 adoptions. There were too many entities doing adoption.
I agree.
They weren't resilient enough. We weren't making the best use of scarce resources. There wasn't enough concentrated expertise.
But do you worry that we are losing expertise?
Yeah, I do. But then we've had a kind of an age profile in adoption where we have lots of people who are close to retirement or are retiring. We are losing some good people because of the churn. But then adoption is constantly evolving. If you think 5 years ago, if people talked about activity days, they would have thought you were mad.
Yeah.
Of course you can't bloody bring them face to face. We now have bump into meetings, sometimes two or three times. Yeah. We now have kind of blind sightings. We have all sorts of weird and wonderful ways of thinking, and we're about to kind of go on a big journey to think about opening up a contact after adoption. 20 years ago, we didn't even tell people they were adopted. Mm-hmm. So I think adoption is constantly changing, and the workforce needs to be able to adapt to that. And we need to be as creative as we can be. And certainly there is some good evidence around concurrency and some of the kind of adoption support models. Think like what After Adoption did with Manchester, for example, early 2000s, the way in which Adoption Matters and Caritas Care run one of the most successful concurrency programs in the country in the Northwest. Yeah. Where that single focus on adoption has enabled the incubation of some real creative and innovative practices.
Interestingly, though, the examples you've used are not local authorities.
Well, sorry, I did that on purpose.
All right.
Then South Tyneside. No, that was my point. But then South Tyneside, for example, one of the best concurrency kind of models in the country as well. There's lots of good practice on both sides. But I think sometimes having a single focus on a service can help. But I must say, wearing my kind of permanency hat, there is a real challenge peeling away one route to permanence from all the others. So when you have adoption sitting over here in a shared service, but you've got special guardianship and long-term fostering sitting somewhere else, how does the system understand the way in which we assess children's permanency needs and the way in which we deliver permanency support needs?
Well, that's a massive question, because looking at the SGO stats, they're almost on par with adoption now, aren't they?
They are. I mean, we've seen massive increases in SGOs, and we're starting to see increased take-up of the Adoption Support Fund. Interestingly, the ASF is still called the ASF, even though it's available to special guardians. And people still talk about the ALB, and we have regional ALBs, but we're trying to bring special guardians, and only special guardians from care at the moment, into the kind of into the stable, if you like.
Because when we families get our
which
act,
is a really tricky piece of work.
Yeah, but when we get our act together, when the special guardians join up with the foster carers and join up with the adopters, we're going to be a pretty scary bunch of people, aren't we?
Well, yeah.
We need to get our act together, don't we?
Well, we need a movement. There's no doubt about it. And social media is one way of helping with that. I mean, what we also know is the peer support model for fostering in terms of Mockingbird, for example, or whether you're talking about some of the best peer support models in adoption and special guardianship, is a really important part of the way in which we kind of, help to meet each other's needs. So, I think single focus has its benefits, but I again, I'm on record of saying, so I'm very happy for you to broadcast it, is I would have started with looking at regional permanency services. And I would have invited local authorities and the external providers to come together under an innovation program to think about that, rather than just focusing on adoption and legislating.
But I guess that ship has sailed, hasn't it?
No, well, it hasn't. There's one.
Well,
there's one that I know of.
North Midlands are starting to look at it.
Yeah.
The Greater Manchester Combined Authority are starting to think about how they commission together. Martin and I, in our Fostering Stocktake, have made a recommendation around having commissioning hubs. What I'm talking about here is a broader piece about how we use the RAA footprint moving forward as a way of thinking about bigger permanency services.
And pulling those other services under those umbrellas that are going to be set up.
Yeah, now either that umbrella or what we're starting to hear is, whilst it's a really difficult journey for DCSs and their members to go down to land one of these RAAs, once you land one and you have an effective management board overlooking performance and thinking about resources, they can start to see how they might do other things together. So Aspire, for example, Dorset, Poole and Bournemouth, they already have special guardianship assessments and support in their RAA.
Right, which is fantastic.
And other RAs are starting to think about long-term fostering. Now, part of this conversation plays right into the concerns you raised, Al, the right concerns about what it means to social workers and kind of, moving around and just more change and transformation. But there is something about the way in which some local authorities are too small to do it on their own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you keep going?
Sorry.
Yeah, it's just I have to leave the building in one.
I was trying to do that subtly.
Yeah,
I've never been able to pat my head and rub my belly the opposite direction at once. So.
Rubbish.
I know.
So you got
there you go.
2 minutes.
In my last 2.5 minutes, is there anything I haven't covered?
No, I mean, really, in a minute, what do you think? What will we look like in 5 years' time? What are the changes going to be? You've got a minute, because I do get kicked out of the building at 10 o'clock. Literally gets kicked out. A man comes and gets me.
I think we will have 20 to 25 regional adoption agencies, and they will all deliver adoption services. But I think increasingly they will deliver other routes to permanence, and they will develop quite considerable expertise around the way in which they think about attachment and trauma. I think there will be attachment and trauma aware services in a way that we are yet to see. I think that concentration of expertise will enable us to have quite specialist service hubs, as well as having almost like Sure Start Centre kind of drop-in centres for adoption support in the way in which those footprints work. So I would like to think that we will make better use of what still remains quite a lot of resource, which is co-produced with adopters, special guardianship families, fostering families. And I'd like to think that we will see families differently, that we will think about families more holistically rather than legal status.
Well, that's an optimistic end, isn't it? I mean, that is.
I've written all that down. So
we're going to quote you on it.
2 years.
5 years' time.
Yeah.
That could be my test. Did we all help to deliver this to improve children's lives? Let's wait and see.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, gents.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. And you've got such a wealth of knowledge and insight. And it really does. We could have just done one on adoption, one on your story, which is an amazing story, and one on fostering. So thank you very much for your time, and look after yourself.
Thanks very much, guys. All the best.
And you.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye-bye.